What a very fertile imagination you've got, Kai, and just how much you're pouring into this score is just really wonderful. Now, there's going to be a lot that I'm going to end up suggesting and adjusting and so on and so forth, but it doesn't mean that this isn't really uh, a great effort and just there's so much about this that is very worthy, very dedicated, and you're giving me a lot to talk about, and that's really great. So, just a few little bits and pieces here and there. Like, for instance, here you say A2 flutes, or excuse me, A2 piccolos, right? So, but we only have one piccolo mentioned here at the beginning. So I think this is possibly a copy paste error. And here you had a C natural in your horns, and I actually fixed that so that just so that it wouldn't sound kind of out of tune. And now, if you'd actually intended that to be a minor against a major third, then I apologize. But it seemed to me that it was just maybe a careless error, or that something that you missed, maybe added at the last minute, but that didn't play back the mock-up to check. So let's start at the beginning, and let's talk a little bit about this kind of bell percussion and balancing against the rest of the orchestra. Okay? So I would say that you should take the general approach in this kind of stuff of thinking about things like vibraphone and celesta as being instruments that have the same dynamic limitations as the harp, right? So any level that you are going to mark the harp up to in order to have it be heard against a texture, even if it's a softer texture like this, but adding horns, right, and then softer heavy brass, you are going to have to mark up the mallets just the way that you are marking up the harp. Okay, so once again, I'm just going to jump in here and say, I don't want people to think that I'm constantly suggesting mark up the harp, mark down the brass, blah, blah, blah. It's just that I am, in general, getting scores in which that is needed. Okay? So there are ways of orchestrating that do not require that kind of dynamic balancing. And I do that sometimes, and I do the other way sometimes. Okay, but in this instance, I would say if you require your harp to be marked up to mezzo piano in order to be audible, then you should also mark your vibraphone and your celesta. Now, the celesta cannot actually play louder than mezzo piano as related to the rest of the orchestra, and hammering at a celesta doesn't really make it all that much louder, right? And really, really playing, kind of laying back on the celesta doesn't make it all that much softer. There is a dynamic range to the celesta, but it's not very big. Okay? But, I would say you can still mark a mezzo forte or a forte on celesta, indicating to take that instrument up to its highest level of loudness, but that isn't very loud, right? Okay. So I would just say, just in general, just make it more unified, right? So just have your bell percussion, like whatever level, just it should all be the same. So mezzo piano in the celesta, mezzo piano in the vibes right here, and then see that just makes sense here, right? Just continuing on. Now, having said that, like this low scoring in the vibes is just going to get swallowed by the trombones. I mean, even with them playing pianissimo and the vibes playing mezzo piano or even mezzo forte, there will be a tendency for all of the weight on this to just eat up your vibes. And the problem is that in general, these delicate bell instruments, glockenspiel, vibraphone, celesta, and so on, they are really intended to be used with light scoring, right? Why does the celesta work so well in the Nutcracker, it's because there's almost no accompaniment in terms of sustain or competition or anything else, right? So that is why it stands out so easily. And even at that, I've heard performances where the celesta just did not, it still had some problems in being heard, right? So it's not necessarily a panacea, but there's always going to be a little bit of a problem with the celesta projecting through. It just depends on the stage and a bunch of other things. All right, so with that comment, with that very long introductory comment, let's start talking about the scoring. So in general, I would say that, I just praised your imagination, and I think it's great. I would submit to you that a lot of the doubling that you have got in here in the brass, where you're sort of adding brass voices to wind voices and so on, is probably unnecessary in the long run. Very soft background harmonies underneath the winds and the strings would probably do exactly the same work that you intend to happen with this sort of direct doubling that you're scoring in most cases. And it would lighten up the textures, right? Because the textures are very thick and dense in a lot of places, just because of the things like this. Doubling the clarinets with the trombones, doubling the cellos with the bass trombone, and so on and so forth, right? So some of these, and some of the elegance of these lines does not actually match the brass doubling. Like, for instance, this line right in here, which sound fantastic on bassoon or bass clarinet, will sound quite powerful, even with these sort of mezzo dynamics that you've got scored here. We'll have a tendency to shout over the cellos, right? So, and then here you have like even thicker, like you've got the bass trombone doubling the second trombone in here. So even, that's just more and more weight being put on some of these textures. So probably, lightening things up. Here's an experiment that you can try. Okay, pick every place where the brass are not doing something essential, like right in here, for instance, right? And make a copy, an experimental copy of this score. Pick every place where the brass are not doing something essential, and mute the instruments or just erase them. Right, mute the brass instruments or erase them. And then listen to how it sounds without the brass helping out. Then very slowly, judiciously, just add exactly what cannot be left out. And then, I think that will show you that, like, without the brass instruments, you have a certain lightness of texture that invites the use of this sort of bell percussion and harp and so on, right? I'm saying bell percussion. That doesn't really mean anything, but you know what I mean. It's things that tinkle, that go ting ting. And of course, like I sympathize with the inability of the mock-up to really understand a softly rolled tam-tam. But you're sort of bringing it on yourself because you add an accent there, right? So if you took away the accent, then I think you would get the right effect here, both live and from the mock-up. Okay, all right, so let's focus on the scoring again. Keep getting distracted. So starting off, I think that this is actually valid to have, you've got triple clarinets below, and then you've got your first flute above. I think that this management of the dynamics is valid. Just because the clarinets are going to be very, having them gang up like this in three parts, I think this note belongs down here, doesn't it? Having these triple clarinets play the harmony below is definitely going to create a it's going to create a kind of harmonic resonance that will tend to blot out the first flute if it's not playing a little louder, right? So that's definitely a good call, all right? And then going forwards, though, here you're going to A2 flutes, and the English horn is joining in, and you've got all this other stuff going on. So I think that it's okay to bring up the volume or bring up the strength of the other instruments. I think you could mark these other parts piano going forwards into this push. Now, English horn is doubling first clarinet, and so now we're starting to get into like some of the intense doubling. Here you're really managing this pianissimo or triple pianissimo horns, you're pushing into piano and then back to piano. Like you're really trying to not get in the way, but then as things proceed, it really does start to swallow up the sounds of the other instruments, even with the best intentions. But I still like the restraint here. Like you're really not bringing in the strings until right here. But I would submit to you that the pianissimo, forte piano, tremolo down to triple P, the strings will basically not be heard at all against this lush cushion, right? And the same thing goes for here you have like A3 trumpets reaching up, mezzo piano, and here you've got your flutes, like A2 flutes, and then the piccolo above. And so the only instruments that really kind of have a chance here are the oboes. The oboes will blend in a little bit with the sound of the trumpet on top, and the first bassoon will lend a little bit of weight to the trombone part, but really the heavy brass will be the dominant color in here, and everything else is going to just really take a back seat, and the flutes will be invisible. And even at that, the piccolo, the sound of the piccolo, at least at this dynamic, will tend to get swallowed into the resonance of the first trumpet. So you know that there is room to rethink this. Yeah, and then like sort of these kind of rising horns right in here will have a tendency to kind of swallow what's going on here in your first oboe and in the English horn. So just some similar comments to what I've made before. What do you mean when you put a slur over repeated notes? Right? Here you're sort of just dropping the piano phrasing onto the winds, but what does this mean? Right? I mean, I know what it means for piano, but are you saying that you want the players to have a sort of a portato attack here, to sort of articulate these notes with their stomach? Are you saying that you don't really intend for this slur to really be, a hard and fast rule that it's all under one breath? Or I mean, what do you like? The thing is that it's just so easy to make these things clear by managing the actual slurs where you intend the players to slur from one note to the next, like to breathe into the next note and then tongue on the other one and so on. So you just really need to work that out more, okay? Especially if you're going to take this much care. You should really, make sure that all of that stuff is covered and not just drop the piano style slurring onto it. And the other thing too is you really want to slur across all of these downbeats, right? Ta, ta, where's, is anybody tonguing on the downbeat? Anywhere, right? Not till we get to here. So, I mean, just really think about how you are restricting the articulation, the sense of pulse on the downbeat with all of this slurring across the downbeat. Okay, I mean, it's just a style, and sure, I mean, it can be valid in certain types of orchestration, but like, look at the beautiful way that you managed it with your strings. You're really thinking about it here. Down, up, down, up, down, up, down. So, I mean, of course, the winds and the brass don't have to worry about up and down bows, but I mean, they do have to sort of think about what you mean. And of course, they'll play this sort of as a semi-portato kind of a thing, the way that you've got it scored. But I mean, this is happening so much in so many people's scores that I am thinking that it is not, that that it is not necessarily intentional that people are thinking about that type of articulation. It is more just just dropping it on and not thinking about it. So I'm you're putting me at a disadvantage here. I really wish people would think about that particular aspect of my 12 common errors, of not just reusing piano slurring, but really think about the way that the instruments are going to divide up breaths and bowings across, like for instance here, like you've got down, up, and then so I feel that this kind of bowing, though I really respect the fact that you are staying up in the same area with the bow stroke and then just jumping down to a different bow stroke. I think it would work better if this were bowed and then this were bowed separately, right? Then that helps the definition of the pulse on the downbeat here, as opposed to just sliding across it. And the same thing here, right? Okay. Yeah, and right in here, I don't think you need A2 on your bassoons. I think you kind of get a less gentle, less delicate sound. I think it's better to use a single bassoon and then have like the maybe second bassoon up to here, then dovetail into first bassoon and then play the thirds, right? That kind of a thing. This is all really cool, though. I mean, I really enjoy, like, I think this is great, the way that you are doing, cellos plus clarinets, and then you have bassoon, and then that's a cello plus bass clarinet, and then bassoons, and then cello plus bass clarinet. I mean, I love the variation of dynamic. I love the little added phrase in here with piccolo on top and so on. I think that that's all very strong. You notice, though, that, like, the harp is just invisible there, isn't it? Right? So if it's invisible, take it up an octave, change it in some way, make it more audible, or just leave it out, right? Just give the harpist a break, right? Or come up with a different idea. And certainly the celesta is more than audible in here, and it's marked up in such a way that it's more audible, and that's great. Okay, all right, so here we start getting into adding more and more voices with the brass. So, like this kind of sinuous doubling of the of parts that are happening in other instruments, right? I've already discussed about how feasible that is, how much weight that adds to the lines, and how much that obliterates like the delicacy and the grace of the writing in the winds and the strings, right? So it's just an aesthetic choice for you, but I mean certainly the weight of something like this. You've got these clarinets right in here, and divisi cellos, and the rising line in the cellos here. Certainly the trombone is going to make it feel weighty, if not clumsy, right? And then adding the strength here, mezzo forte, pushing into this, there will basically be no cello and especially at the way that you've got the difference in the dynamics marked here. The trombones will completely take this over, right? And they will even start to obscure the rising line here that you've got in your cellos and low winds, right? So it's really the trade-offs that you're making here are I'm not going to say that they're fatal, but they really are messing up with the clarity of the scoring. So yeah, and then A3 here you have. See, this is a little strange. Mezzo piano crescendo, and then right in the middle you've got a mezzo piano sitting there. Yeah, and I understand the problem that you have is that you want this nice long hairpin for your first voice, but then you also want to give the second and third trumpet a dynamic. So it would be better to start soft, right? To start with piano, crescendo, hairpin to here, mezzo piano for everybody, crescendo into mezzo forte. That would be a better way of managing that if you had to. And I would say, yeah, just like everything should come, like if you really want this to blend and to work and for the clarity and the grace and the phrasing and all of the other beautiful things that the winds and the strings are doing in here to come through, if you really are going to have to soft pedal, you're just really going to have to back off on your brass. As I said before, like a way that the brass could contribute to this and lighten the entire texture would be to take more of a background harmonic role, right? And then just add little bits of emphasis. Like, for instance, this right in here is very cool. And then pushing into this line here is also very cool, right? But this, this kind of doubling of the elements of what are going on in the strings and brass here, definitely does not add. I mean, it sort of takes away from the kind of the sense of lightness. And the other thing too is why are we having different breathing patterns and bowing patterns and everything else, right? Try to make that mesh a little bit more. If anything, try to have the wind players take things more with one breath, and then the string players divide it up into smaller bits, right? Just to give them more control over their sense of nuance. And another thing too is that, like, you can trade off between players. Like, this could be second trombone leading to first trombone leading to intervals. Same thing here. This could be second bassoon leading to first bassoon leading to intervals. So just think of some of those particular options. All right, so here, like, the things start to lighten up, and I just really feel that this is where some of the scoring becomes very strong. So just to jump back to the idea of scoring in its purest, the general ideas, the treatment of the parts, the transcription, the reinterpretation, and so on, is very strong. Okay, it's just I feel that the weight that you're adding with some of the parts is unnecessary, right? So, for instance, this is great what the heavy brass are doing right in here. All right, I love that. This possibly making the line very heavy. Yeah, so it's just really, I mean, part of it is a matter of taste, but it's also a matter of contrast and scope, right? Of the meaning of the music and so on. But I mean, and you have to watch out, just really proofread some of this so you don't have things like mezzo forte crescendo into mezzo forte, right? That was one of the memes from last year's, pro composer looks at music memes, right? So if you mean this to be mezzo forte crescendo and then drop down to mezzo forte subito, right? Then you have to write SUB period for subito, that kind of thing. But in general, I feel that, like, just overall, though the ideas here are really strong in general, like the overall distributing the parts to the different instruments, aside from some of this doubling, I feel it's nice and strong. But I think that you need to sort of proofread your dynamics a little bit and just really watch about who gets what and what dynamic and so on and so forth. Like, for instance, the assigning a forte dynamic here to the horns and then a mezzo forte to the trumpets, you may be thinking, well, okay, this is because I've heard that that brass are twice as loud and so on and so forth. But the concern is not so much with how loud the brass are here, or the heavy brass are compared to the horns. The concern is how much all of the brass are, how heavy they are compared to everybody else in the orchestra, right? So you're going to need to bring down everybody in the brass, right, in order for this to balance correctly, because the scoring is so close and integrated, right? So what I would recommend is more like forte for everybody here at B in the winds and the strings. And then you can bring things down, or you can push in certain things and pull out again and so on. But I mean, it's, I would say, just, have stronger dynamics, and then everybody can be mezzo forte, including these horns up here, right? And then you have room to add some, like pushing into this, and like a starting mezzo forte, going up to forte, and then everybody going diminuendo down to piano, and so on and so forth. So I think there just needs to be better management here of the dynamic curve, and some better, some thought given to balancing these brass against the winds and the strings. Okay, and cool, but, like, did you notice, like this glockenspiel note is invisible, right? Piano. Where is that? What, you know? Then the cymbal crash and the tam tam boosh and so on and so forth. I'm wondering if these could be the same dynamic of mezzo forte, and then the glockenspiel could be forte, and then we would actually hear it as a complement to the flute and the violins, right? Just adding something to their presence there. All right, and this harp right in here is just really wonderfully scored. Like the completist in me was sort of yearning for the strings to continue on and just like maybe die out by right around here, just to add more behind the harp, because I felt that by the time they dropped out here, this felt a little empty. But I mean, you're setting up the unaccompanied feeling of the clarinets here, so I understand that, bass clarinet going into first clarinet, so I understand the impulse to back off. So I mean, that is nicely scored as well. And then this is all very cool. The flutes and the strings, the violins working together, as well as the bassoon and pizzicato cellos working together, and so on. And then the celesta coming in here. I would say that vibes would be much more effective here than celesta. The problem with the lower register of the celesta kind of getting down to below middle C is that it has a kind of a thunk sort of a quality, which sound sets have sort of taken out, but you can still hear some of it. It becomes more about the sound of the hammer hitting the metal and less about the metal resonating after it's been struck. That is the big problem with lower the first octave of the celesta, and then like there are some models that add a further octave down of the celesta, and I just feel it's like it is just exacerbating the problem. Okay, so just really watch out for that first octave. The lower notes of the vibraphone play those notes just so much freer and more open, and that has something to do with the mallet that's being used and the size of the tone bar and everything else. And then once again, just like the last entry, we're getting a taste of what's to happen going forward, and the rest of this entry is really lovely, Kai, and I wish that you had been able to participate so that I could give you a full evaluation, because there's a whole lot to say about what's coming up, and despite all of my scolding and my suggestions of solving this problem and that problem and so on, it doesn't mean that you didn't orchestrate this well. It just means that perhaps some of your plans for tones and timbre and weight and so on and so forth may be a little stronger in practice than you may be thinking of in principle. Okay? So I want you to keep all those things in mind, and I desperately want you to enter the next 2 or 3 orchestration challenges. Please keep at this. Your scoring is getting better and stronger and more insightful, and there are just certain things, like thinking about the length of slurring over string notes and so on and so forth. I want you to get better at that. I want you to get more insightful about the balance between things, and I mean, yeah, the next 3, I have them totally planned out, the next 3 selections for the next 3 years, and I think that those would just build on this wave of improvement and capability and instincts that I'm seeing coming from you, and just feeling so positive about it. So thank you so much for this entry, Kai, and for supporting on Patreon. It really makes a huge amount of difference, and for coming back to these orchestration challenges, and also just to everybody else who has been watching so far. I have a special request to all of my semi-brev participants. Please comment on each other's scores. It just really makes a huge difference to me, because we are heading into the lean times, right? These orchestration challenges always start off with the first couple of weeks, lots of comments, people are excited, And then, they get busy with their day jobs and they get distracted, and maybe they only have time to comment on the weekends, and they fall behind in their viewing if they intended to view everything, and so on and so forth. And so things start to get, the comments start to die down a little bit, and that's a shame, because that's, the longer the score, the more effort people have put into them, and perhaps the more deserving of a comment that, in some frames. Of course, everybody is deserving of as many comments as they can get. That's my feeling. But it is a shame that the longer efforts that start coming later in the challenge start getting less comments. So let's break that. Let's break the back of that unfortunate circumstance by having people who are part of a group of evaluations, like all the semi-brev evaluations, please comment on each other's works. If every entrant, if every participant at one level were to comment on each other's works, then that would just ensure that the energy would keep going, and it would invite people on the sidelines to come in and jump in too and leave their comments, and it would really keep things healthy all the way through to the end. All right. So that's all I've got to say about this. Or actually, that is not all I've got to say about this score. I could spend a whole hour talking about even just everything up to here. But I better stop there. So thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Kai. And please join me as I take a look at the next score for today.